What would you do if the God you prayed to took everything you loved? What happens when a woman, consumed by a grief so total it felt like a physical element, decides to fight back not with prayer, but with fire? This is the story of Alara, a woman who burned a picture of the Virgin Mary, and what rose from those ashes was not condemnation, but a miracle that would forever alter the soul of a forgotten town. The silence in Alara's house was a living thing. It had weight and texture, pressing down on the floorboards and clinging to the dusty furniture like a shroud. It was the silence of waiting, waiting for the shallow, rattling breaths from the back bedroom to finally cease. Her husband, Thomas, was a ghost in their own bed, a pale outline of the man who had once filled this small home with laughter and the scent of sawdust. Now, he was just another vessel for the sickness, the quiet thief that had already stolen their daughter. Lily. Her name was a wound in Alara's heart, one that refused to scar over. 2 years had passed, but grief was not a river that flowed to the sea. It was an ocean, and Alara was drowning in it. The same sickness that had hollowed out Lily's bright eyes was now doing the same to Thomas. It had no name, this creeping fatigue, this slow fading. The doctors in the city had shrugged, offered words like syndrome and anomaly, and sent them home to Havenwood to wait. Havenwood itself seemed to be waiting. The town was nestled in a valley that felt more like a basin, collecting shadows and forgotten histories. Its paint was peeling, its fences leaning. It was a town holding its breath, mirroring the stillness in Alara's own home. Faith here was a quiet, weathered thing, like the old stone church on the hill, attended by a few stoic souls who seemed to pray out of habit more than hope. Alara had once been one of them. She had prayed until her knees were raw and her throat was hoarse. She had pleaded, bargained, and screamed into the void for Lily's life. The void had not answered. Her faith had crumbled, then turned to dust, then been scattered by the bitter wind of her anger. On the wall in the dim hallway hung the last remnant of that abandoned faith. It was a small, framed picture of the Virgin Mary, her face serene, her head tilted in a gesture of gentle sorrow. It had been a gift from old Agnes next door, a woman whose piety was as much a part of her as the wrinkles on her hands. Agnes had given it to her when Lily was born, a silent blessing for the new mother. Now, Alara saw no blessing in it. She saw a mockery. She saw a placid, untroubled mother who presided over a world where other mothers had their children ripped from their arms. The serene face felt like an accusation, a symbol of a deaf heaven. Every time she passed it, a fresh wave of rage would wash over her. It was a cold fury, the kind that settles deep in the bones. Statues and pictures, she thought, they don't feel anything. They just watch. That afternoon, the rattling in the bedroom grew softer, shallower. Dr. Miles came and went, his face a mask of professional sympathy that did little to hide his helplessness. He was a man of science, of tangible things, and this sickness was an enemy he could not see. "Keep him comfortable," he had said, the same useless words he had spoken over Lily's bed. Comfort. The word was an insult. When the doctor left, Alara stood in the suffocating silence of her home. The weight of it all, the years of loss, the sleepless nights, the impending finality, pressed down until she thought her ribs would crack. Her eyes fell on the picture in the hall. The serene mother, the passive witness. Something inside Alara snapped. It was not a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, seismic shift. The grief and the anger that had been simmering for 2 years finally boiled over, and it needed a target. She walked into the hallway and pulled the picture from the wall. The frame was cool in her trembling hands. She stared into the painted eyes, her own reflection a ghostly imposition over the Virgin's face. "You watched," she whispered, her voice a raw tear in the silence. "You watched her go, and now you're watching him go. For what?" The painted eyes offered no answer. Of course they didn't. With a decisiveness that surprised even herself, she carried the picture through the kitchen and out the back door. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth. Beside the weathered shed stood an old, rusted burn barrel, filled with dry leaves and twigs from the yard. She did not hesitate. She tossed the picture into the barrel, the glass cracking as it landed. She found the matches in the shed, her movements swift and deliberate. She struck one, the flare of sulfur a brief, violent star in the twilight. She dropped the match onto the dry leaves. The flame caught quickly, a small orange flower that grew with a hungry crackle. It licked at the edges of the wooden frame, blackening the cheap gold paint. Alara watched, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her face illuminated by the flickering light. The fire reached the image itself. The serene face began to warp, to blister. The gentle blue of the robe turned to black ash. The face seemed to melt, the expression of sorrow turning into a grotesque mask before it curled inward and was consumed. Alara stood there until there was nothing left but glowing embers and a wisp of gray smoke that climbed into the darkening sky and disappeared. She expected to feel something. Relief, perhaps. A cathartic release. Vengeance. She felt nothing. The silence that rushed in to fill the space left by the fire was colder, deeper, and more absolute than before. It was the silence of a deed done, a final line crossed. She had thrown her rage at heaven, and heaven, it seemed, had not even noticed. She went back inside, the smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. The house was exactly as she had left it. The rattling breath from the bedroom was unchanged. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been avenged. The emptiness inside her had only grown larger, echoing with the crackle of the fire. The next morning, the news came over the backyard fence. It was Martha, who lived 2 houses down, her voice tight with fear. Her son, Leo, a bright, energetic boy of 7 with hair the color of corn silk, had woken with the fever. The town's quiet dread had found a new name. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Leo. He had been Lily's friend. They had chased butterflies in this very yard. The sickness, once a private horror confined to her own home, was spreading. It felt like a consequence, a ripple spreading outward from the stone she had thrown. Later that day, Agnes knocked on her door. The old woman held a small pot of soup, her eyes filled with a familiar, gentle sadness. Her gaze drifted for a moment to the empty space on the hallway wall, to the faint rectangle of dust where the picture had hung. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She looked back at Alara, and in her eyes, there was no judgment. There was only a profound, heartbreaking pity. That pity was worse than any condemnation. It made Alara feel small, her grand act of defiance reduced to a pathetic, childish tantrum. Agnes left the soup on the table and departed as quietly as she had come. The days that followed were a blur of deepening crisis. Thomas grew weaker, barely conscious. Across town, Leo's condition worsened with alarming speed. The small town of Havenwood felt like a ship taking on water, a quiet panic setting in. People stayed indoors. The laughter of children was absent from the streets. Dr. Miles rushed between the 2 homes, his face growing more haggard with each visit. He admitted his confusion, his utter defeat. "I've sent samples everywhere," he told Alara, his voice strained. "No one has seen anything like it. It's as if their own bodies are just shutting down." Alara was utterly alone. The act of burning the picture had not freed her, it had walled her in. Her anger had been a shield, and now it was gone, leaving her exposed and raw. In its place was a gnawing, hollow guilt. She had raged against a silent heaven, and in return, the world had simply grown more silent, more sorrowful. Then, the subtle strangeness began. It started one evening as she stood by the back door, staring at the cold, dark burn barrel. A scent drifted on the air. It was faint, but unmistakable. Roses. The sweet, heavy perfume of summer roses, impossible in the crisp autumn air. Her own rose bushes were bare, thorny skeletons against the fence. She looked around, but there was nothing. The scent lingered for a moment, a ghostly presence, and then vanished. A trick of the mind, she told herself. Grief plays tricks. A few days later, she found a single white feather on her front doorstep. It was perfect, unruffled, as if placed there by hand. There were no nests in the eaves of her porch. She dismissed it as a coincidence, a stray gift from the wind. Yet she picked it up and tucked it into her pocket, the soft texture a strange comfort against her fingers. The most unnerving event happened one night. She was sitting in the dark living room, listening to the labored rhythm of Thomas's breathing from the other room, when a sound made her stiffen. It was the gentle, metallic chiming of the wind chimes on the porch, the ones Lily had loved. They had been silent for 2 years, ever since the day she died. Alara had never had the heart to take them down. She went to the window and peered out. The night was perfectly still. The leaves on the old oak tree were motionless. There was no wind, not a whisper of a breeze. Yet the chimes continued their soft, melodic song for a full minute before falling silent again. Alara's skepticism, the hard armor she had worn for so long, began to crack. These were not tricks of a grieving mind. They were whispers, small, inexplicable signs that the world was not as empty and indifferent as she had believed. The thought did not comfort her. It terrified her. It meant she was not alone in her defiant emptiness. It meant something, or someone, was watching after all. The crisis reached its peak on a cold, starless night. Thomas's breathing had become so faint she had to press her ear to his chest to hear it. Dr. Miles had been there an hour before, his expression grim. "It will be soon," he had said gently. "I'm so sorry, Alara." The same words, the same ending. Martha had called, her voice broken by sobs. Leo was not expected to make it through the night. The town's vigil was ending. 2 more lives were being surrendered to the silent thief. Alara sat by Thomas's bedside, her body numb with exhaustion, her soul scraped clean of everything but a vast, aching void. She had no anger left, no defiance, no hope. She was nothing but a witness to the end. Her head fell forward, and sleep, heavy and unwelcome, dragged her under. She did not dream of her own home. She found herself standing in a barren field. The earth beneath her feet was cracked and dry, and the sky above was a deep, star-strewn indigo, more brilliant than any sky she had ever seen. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of a profound, listening peace. A figure approached from the horizon. It was a woman, walking with a slow, deliberate grace. She was wrapped in a cloak the color of the midnight sky, and as she drew closer, Alara could see her face. It was the face from the picture. But this was not a painted, serene image. This face was alive with an ancient, unbearable sorrow. The eyes that met Alara's held a grief that mirrored her own, yet was magnified 1,000 times over, a mother's sorrow that encompassed the pain of the entire world. There was no anger in that gaze, no condemnation. There was only a deep, shocking well of compassion. Alara stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to run. This was the face she had cursed, the image she had given to the fire. And here it was, looking at her not as a sinner, but as a fellow sufferer. The woman did not speak. Words were not necessary. She simply raised her hands, her palms facing upward. Floating just above them, like a shimmering memory, was an image. It was Lily. Her daughter was not sick, not pale. She was whole and radiant, her laughter echoing in the quiet field, though her image made no sound. She was running through a field of wildflowers, her white dress brilliant against the green. And running beside her, trying to catch her, was Leo, his face split by a joyful grin. They were not ghosts. They were pure life, pure joy. Then, a message entered Alara's mind. It was not a voice she heard with her ears, but a thought, a feeling, that bloomed in the center of her being, gentle and clear as a bell. "My son waits for them." It was a statement of fact, a promise of a safe harbor. But it was not the end of the message. The woman's sorrowful eyes held Alara's, and a second wave of understanding washed over her. "But he also waits for you." It was an invitation, an offering of peace, a bridge across the chasm of her despair. It was the love of a mother reaching out to another mother, across time and eternity, to say, "I know your pain. I have felt it too. You are not alone." The vision of the children faded. The woman lowered her hands and gave a small, sad smile. Then she turned and walked back toward the horizon, dissolving into the starlight from which she had come. Alara woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright in the chair. The bedroom was dark and quiet. For a terrifying moment, she thought the silence meant Thomas was gone. She reached for his hand. It was still warm. She pressed her ear to his chest. A heartbeat, faint but steady. Tears began to stream down her face. But they were not the hot, angry tears she had shed for 2 years. These were different. They were tears of release, of a sorrow so profound it had become beautiful. They were tears of gratitude. The crushing weight on her soul, the heavy stone of her grief and rage, was gone. It had not been taken from her. She had been allowed to set it down. In its place was a peace that made no sense. A quiet, luminous calm settled in the room, chasing away the shadows. The air no longer felt heavy with death, but sacred, holy. Driven by an instinct she did not understand, Alara left the room. She walked out the back door into the cold night, her bare feet heedless of the damp grass. She went to the burned barrel, the site of her final, bitter act of defiance. She knelt before it. She plunged her hands into the cold, soft ashes, not caring about the grime. She sifted through them, searching. Her fingers closed around something hard and sharp. She pulled it out. It was a single, triangular shard of the wooden frame, charred black on all sides but one, where a small sliver of the cheap gold paint still clung. She clutched it in her fist, as if it were the most precious jewel in the world. This was her reminder, her relic, a testament to both the fire and the grace that had followed. Holding the shard, she walked through the sleeping town to Agnes's house. The lights were off, but she knocked anyway. After a moment, a light flicked on, and the old woman opened the door, her face etched with concern. Alara didn't have the words to explain the vision, the peace, the impossible hope blooming in her chest. She simply opened her hand and showed Agnes the charred piece of wood. Then, the dam of her composure broke completely, and she collapsed into the old woman's arms, her body shaking with sobs that were part grief, part confession, and part overwhelming joy. Agnes did not say a word. She simply held her, patting her back gently, her silent presence a vessel for all the forgiveness and understanding in the world. When Alara finally returned home, the first light of dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose. She went back to Thomas's bedside. She sat down, took his hand in both of hers, and tucked the wooden shard into his palm. For the first time in 2 years, she prayed. It was not a prayer of demand. It was not a bargain. It was a whisper of pure surrender. "Your son is waiting," she whispered, her words meant for Thomas, for Leo, and for the holy silence in the room. "It's all right. Whatever you decide. Just let there be peace." She closed her eyes and simply sat there, holding his hand, content to wait. She did not know what would happen, but she was no longer afraid. The peace that had filled her was an anchor in the storm. As the sun rose higher, flooding the room with golden light, Thomas stirred. His eyelids fluttered. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at her. The fog of the sickness was gone from his eyes. There was clarity. There was recognition. "Alara," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. A moment later, the phone rang, shrill in the quiet house. It was Martha. Her voice was hysterical, but not with grief. It was with a wild, disbelieving joy. Leo's fever had broken. He had woken up asking for breakfast. Dr. Miles arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand, his face a study in utter bewilderment. He examined Thomas, his stethoscope moving from point to point on his chest. He checked his eyes, took his pulse. He shook his head, looking from his patient to Alara and back again. "I don't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "This isn't possible. A spontaneous remission of this magnitude in both of them at the same time." He trailed off, his scientific certainty crumbling before his eyes. The news spread through Havenwood like a gentle wildfire. It was not loud or sensational, but a quiet, awestruck murmur that passed from house to house. People emerged from their homes, their faces tentative, hopeful. They saw Alara helping Thomas out onto the front porch, wrapping him in a blanket. They saw Leo kicking a ball in his own yard, his mother watching him with tears streaming down her face. There was no rational explanation, and nobody asked for one. They didn't need to. They saw the evidence in Thomas's returning strength. They saw it in Leo's renewed laughter. Most of all, they saw it in Alara. The hard, bitter shell she had worn for 2 years was gone. The anger had been washed from her eyes. In its place was a quiet serenity, a deep, abiding peace that seemed to radiate from her. The community, which had watched her with pity and a little fear, now watched her with a sense of wonder. They didn't know what had happened in the darkest hour of that night, but they could see the result. The town's collective held breath was finally released in a sigh of relief and reverence. Alara never became a preacher. She never stood in the pulpit of the old stone church, which was now seeing more faces on Sunday than it had in a decade. Her testimony was not one of words. Her new mission was one of quiet service. She became a comforter. She sat with the elderly, holding their hands and listening to their stories. She brought meals to new mothers and helped struggling families mend their fences, both literally and figuratively. She shared her own story only when asked, and she did so with a simple, profound humility, her voice free of pride or drama. She spoke of a mother's love that had met her in her darkest moment, a grace she had not earned and could never repay, but could only pass on. The town of Havenwood began to heal, in more ways than one. A new spirit of kindness took root. Neighbors who had been strangers for years started talking over their fences. A community garden was planted on a vacant lot, its green shoots a symbol of the town's rebirth. The shared trauma, followed by the shared miracle, had forged a bond stronger than any hardship. Alara found a small, simple box for the charred piece of the picture frame. She kept it not on a mantelpiece for all to see, but on her bedside table. It was not an idol to be worshipped. It was a scar. It was a reminder of the fire of her own rage, and of the impossible, gentle light that had refused to be extinguished by it. It was a symbol that even from the deepest ashes of our despair, grace can rise, unexpected and unearned, and call us back to life. Alara's story shows us that even when faith is burned to ash, hope can find a way to bloom. It reminds us that in our moments of greatest darkness and defiance, we may not be met with judgment, but with a compassion that understands our deepest sorrows. Her journey from rage to grace healed not just her own heart, but the heart of an entire community. If this story of transformation and forgiveness touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts and personal stories of hope are a vital part of this community. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of faith and redemption. And if you know someone who might be struggling in their own darkness, please share this message of hope with them. You never know whose life you might change.